Hello and welcome to Niche References, where I yap about my niche interests so that I don't annoy my friends and family with them. My name is Chris, and today I'll be ranking all 34 games in the Nancy Drew series by Her Interactive. This ranking is a long time coming, and I'm so excited to finally be able to rank all of the games in the series now that the newest game is out. In my last episode, I mentioned that I score these games based on several factors when I review them, but those scores are irrelevant for today's ranking. This ranking is not based on their average scores that I gave them. I just went through and put them in the order that felt correct to me based on my personal preference and the game's quality. And as a player, the thing that I tend to prioritize when I'm playing a Nancy Drew game is an enjoyable gaming experience. So factors that tend to weigh pretty heavily for me personally are the intuitiveness of the game, if it has enjoyable puzzles, and fun characters, whereas I'm more willing to excuse a really ridiculous story. I think this list really isn't wildly dissimilar from the numerical average list. If anything, it's more like a tweaked version of the list for when the numerical order just didn't really feel quite correct to me. Given that this is largely an audio format, I thought it would be best to do a pure ranking from worst to first for clarity's sake. However, as I was ranking these games, some tiers began to emerge, and there were several groupings of games that I could put in kind of any order. I have a really definitive top 11 and a pretty well-defined bottom group, and then just this big, murky middle section of games. If you do want to watch the video version, it will be linked if you want to see the tiers, but it's not necessary. As we go through the list, I'll let you know how we're progressing through those tiers. And finally, disclaimer before jumping into the list, I have some opinions on these games that are incredibly generic and very widely held, but also some controversial opinions at both the top and the bottom of my list. But at the end of the day, these are just all my opinions, so let's keep everything civil and respectful. Please and thank you. All right, jumping into the list, number 34, bottom of the barrel, last place in both my heart and in my scoring system. It's The Creature of Kabu Cave at number 34. There are a small handful of games that I put into my bottom tier of Nancy Drew games, and this one takes the cake as last place due to it being the most annoying and least fun of those to play. I don't dislike Kabu Cave because Frass sucks. I dislike Kabu Cave because somehow Frass is the best thing in this game, and you know you've done something wrong when sorting bug poop is the best part of your game. The only other thing you really do in here is annoying chores for Big Island Mike's Big Island Scam, and the story makes zero sense. Coming in at 33 to break some nostalgic hearts, it's The Haunted Carousel. And here's my first hot take. It's a beloved fan favorite, but I didn't play it as a kid, and I don't think it holds up to the fans' nostalgia. For me, its first crime is calling itself haunted, simply because one singular solitary video of the carousel moving on its own, and its second crime is promising me an amusement park and giving me zero ability to explore that amusement park, especially at night, especially when, again, you've told me it's a haunted amusement park. The characters are all bland or annoying, and I don't really love any of the puzzles. Also, so much of this game relies on long conversations with phone characters, and that is a personal big pet peeve of mine in these games. If I'm looking for a fun, lighthearted gaming experience in this series, I'm always picking up one of the other games. Number 32, you know it, you hate it. It's Midnight in Salem. Personally, I don't think this one is quite as bad as some people make it out to be, but it's still not good. For me, the highlights are the two kind of cooking mini games, which are Johnny Cakes and the herbal tea at Lauren's shop. Some of the puzzles are kind of cool, but they're poorly explained. The spooky vibes are kind of there, but let down by horrible environments, graphics, and controls. And most of the characters feel bland and underdeveloped. Plus, again, so much of this game relies on long, boring dialogue with those bland characters. At least the Hardy Boys are here, I guess? Coming in at number 31, we've got another famously bad game in the series, and that is The Shattered Medallion. This game gets a teeny tiny ounce of goodwill from me thanks to some of the puzzles being kinda fun. But the story makes no sense. The logistics of the game show make even less sense as a reality TV fan. The characters are mostly completely irrelevant to everything going on, and some of the puzzles are horribly explained. Plus, the mystery and culprit in this game have heavy air quotes around them because is there a mystery? Is there a culprit? It's still unclear. Alright, pulling ourselves out of the very, very bottom of the barrel tier into the tier that I have dubbed horribly unrude. Moving on to number 30, which fittingly is Danger by Design. My most recent replay of this game really tanked it several places on this list. It was kind of mid-tier and I despised it upon this replay. The beginning of the game really holds your hand, makes it very easy, and then suddenly it throws you in the deep end and gets incredibly unintuitive and very frustrating. Danger by Design also has a lot of infamously terrible puzzles like the Dark Room, that final decoding puzzle, and of course the Ichido fight. And there's very little to balance those out for me. Also, I spend an infuriating amount of time painting in this game. It gets very, very annoying. The characters are dull, the story's disjointed. I do really like the tea puzzle, I guess, and making cookies. Like a lot of people, I somehow managed to have these two games back to back on my list. At number 29, it's Phantom of Venice. This is one that's almost completely just down to personal taste. Most of the puzzles in this game are not ones that are really fun for me. I don't like the stealth sequence, the water levels are awful, and everything in Fongo's office is not very intuitive, including the fact that you have to re-break in every time you go in. Plus, the characters in this one aren't that compelling to me either. But I do really love the puzzle where you work with the Italian police, and of course, Scopa. And yes, I know Nancy dancing in the catsuit as Punchy LaRue is iconic, but it took me ages to figure out how that minigame worked, and I despise it. Number 28, Secrets Can Kill Remastered. I've only finished the remastered version. I played part of the original as a kid, but it kept glitching my computer when I tried to switch discs, so I've never played the full version of the original one. And I can't in good conscience put this game much higher on the list, but I do think it's one that tends to be a bit underrated. For a quick, easy little game, it's actually pretty fun. I personally don't mind the chemistry puzzle, but this one is pretty simple in comparison to all the other games in the series, and of course, the culprit in this one sucks. After a short and not quite so sweet tier, we're moving up a tier to the one that I've dubbed Something's Missing Here. This is the tier that starts the murky middle, which has two smaller tiers within it. The next 10 or so games have shifted around a lot for me, but I think I'm finally happy where I've put them on this list. So number 27, we have Mystery of the Seven Keys. This is where the newest game in the series lands on my list. Of all the games in this ranking, this was the one that moved around the most in this section because I feel like my opinion on it is still kind of settling. Nothing about it is amazing, but also nothing about it is really terrible. If you haven't listened to my review, you definitely should, but I think that its biggest downfall was that it just wasn't very intuitive. Because of that, I do think that when I replay it eventually, it will move up this list because the more intuitive a game becomes, the more I enjoy it. But for now, this is where it lands. Alright, number 26. If I didn't break your heart with a haunted carousel, I'm about to break it now. Danger on Deception Island. Again, this is one that I didn't play as a kid, and therefore it doesn't really hold any nostalgia for me. And also the setting is not one that really speaks to me, and most of the characters don't really grab me either. I do like a few of the puzzles, but there are a lot of tasks and chores that are just really tedious, like clamming. The last time I played this, I did do the hack for clamming, which made it go by a lot faster, but if you don't do the hack, clamming takes ages. When actually scoring this game, it ranks a good deal higher on the list, but on my personal list, it just doesn't rank very high because there are so many I'd rather play than this one. Number 25, a game that probably no one expected to make it out of the 30s, Ransom of the Seven Ships. I'm well aware I let this one get a lot higher than most people would allow, and that's just largely because I actually find this game to be kind of fun. Yes, some of the puzzles are poorly designed and explained, but several others are ones that I actually really enjoy. Obviously, as we know, the culprit being the only character in the game is terrible, as is his use of blackface, and Her Interactive was obviously right to pull it from all platforms. But I will say, this isn't the only time that they've been culturally insensitive, but it is probably the most heinous. Overall, is it a terrible mystery? Yeah. But is it also kind of fun with some pretty decent puzzles? Also, yeah. Moving on to number 24, which is Tomb of the Lost Queen. This game has a lot of puzzles. Some are pretty good, but a lot are really unintuitive and way too complicated. On top of that, this isn't a super great game for story or characters. This one, Ransom, and the next one on my list are all back-to-back because they're in a similar vein. Very flawed, difficult, puzzle-heavy games. Ransom ended up below Tomb of the Lost Queen for obvious reasons, and the next one got higher than this one because I preferred the puzzles, the atmosphere, and the characters to Tomb of the Lost Queen. So moving on to that next game, at number 23, we've got Labyrinth of Lies. I wanted so badly to enjoy this game, but it's one of the least intuitive games in the series for me. The characters are fun, but a little one-dimensional. Once you figure out how the puzzles work, several of them are actually really cool, but so many of them are either incredibly poorly explained or needlessly complicated. Also, who built so many puzzles into a theater set? Also, can someone explain to me, like I'm 5, how these theater sets are supposed to be moved around and used in the play? They seem way too massive to be moved from the underground up to the stage. I don't know, I was never in theater, but it seems wildly impractical. And also, why are the sets under the stage still when they're doing the play? But Nancy's locked in the set under the stage. I don't get it. Rant aside, Her Interactive tried something really interesting with the culprit of the game, but I don't think it really worked as well as intended. Number 22. Stay tuned for danger. And you can thank me for this game getting this high on the list because purely based on average score, this is tied for last place, my friends. Every time I replay this game, I find it incredibly unintuitive. There are certain things that I just cannot trigger for the life of me, and it becomes a really, really frustrating experience every time. Plus, it's also very easy to soft lock yourself in this game. But the story is fun, the characters are one-dimensional but fun. I love the photoshopped pictures of real people, and I do have a soft, nostalgic spot for this one. It's also one of my favorites to watch other people play. It's just not a favorite to play myself at all. We're still in the murky middle, but we're moving up a tier into the that's done tier. We're essentially getting into those solid mid-tier games. At number 21, White Wolf of Icicle Creek. White Wolf is the epitome of middle of the road for me because I truly don't have a strong opinion on this game at all. I do really love the music and the cozy atmosphere, but the game really suffers from constant repetition. Cooking is fun until you're stuck in the game, and to progress you have to keep cooking 3 times a day over and over and over again. Fox and Geese is fun. I like Fox and Geese until I'm forced to play it 3 times in 3 very specific ways in order to progress. And those aren't the only examples. There are so many tasks in this game that you're forced to do multiple times, and it's just not that fun to do that. Except when that task is pelting a child with snowballs. That is fun. I will do that over and over again gladly. Number 20, Ghost Dogs of Moon Lake. Many of you are going to think this is very low for this game, but I actually replayed it recently, and that replay boosted it in my personal ranking. This would have been lower. The nostalgia factor is strong with this one. The story is strong, and it has one of the best openings in the series. Near the end of the game, there are some fun puzzles and reveals, but a lot of this game, the majority of this game, is spent interacting with some really dull characters and doing some truly heinous chores for them. It also just doesn't help that I'm not an outdoorsy girly, and my 2 biggest fears are birds and bugs. If the game spent more time on speakeasies and ghost dogs and less time on forests, birds, and critters, it'd fare significantly better. Number 19, The Deadly Device. I keep swapping this game and the one I placed at number 18, but I gave the boost to the other game because I prefer its puzzles. Deadly Device gives us one of the rare murder mysteries in the series, which is excellent. And the cast of characters in this one is actually deceptively very complex and really compelling. One of the reasons this is so low on my list is that I really struggled with the intuitiveness of the puzzles. And also, perhaps unsurprisingly at this point, physics was my least favorite class in high school, so the theming of this one is not a personal fave. Number 18, Trail of the Twister. I can hear you now. I know. This has gotten way higher than it deserves. The story's weak, the characters are even weaker, and the entire game is basically just a chore simulator. I get it. But All of the chores in this game are essentially puzzles instead of stupid fetch quests. And the puzzles in this game slap. They're a really nice level of difficulty, and there are some really cool, fresh puzzles here. Praise aside, I do have to say, as someone who's lived in Tornado Alley most of my life, suspending my disbelief in this game was a struggle. I promise we don't get hit with tornadoes every day like we do in the game. Alright, time to move up to the next tier, which is called Stay Beautiful. These next 6 games in this tier are ones that I think are really solid, but fall just outside of my top 11 clear faves. Number 17, The Secret of the Old Clock. I recently replayed this one for the first time since childhood, and I kind of wasn't expecting much of it, but I was pleasantly surprised. The characters are a bit bland, and there's a huge chore run in the middle of the game, but on the whole, I think this one's actually pretty fun, and it has some great vibes. Where a lot of fans would choose the Haunted Carousel as their go-to quick little lighthearted game, I would pick Secret of the Old Clock. Number 16, The Secret of the Scarlet Hand. I actually didn't play this one as a kid, and I held off playing it for so long because I'd heard how infamously difficult it was, so imagine my shock when I actually kinda loved it. It's fairly educational, sure, but I really don't mind that. There are also some very silly, goofy elements that give me a giggle. Hi, Henrik. Overall, this was just a really pleasant surprise for me. Okay, number 15. I cannot in good conscience put this next game any higher on the list, and I'm about to break a lot of hearts with this one, so allow me to start with my thesis statement. I believe that the final scene would have been much better as a movie, and as a result, a lot of gameplay elements are not that great. There, I said it. Imagine it being a movie that's set in a theater in Washington, D.C., so Nancy can go to Library of Congress and go to the county archives. I can see that being a great movie, because the story and the characters are genuinely some of the best in the series, but as a game, this one is rough. There are so many unintuitive triggers, puzzles that aren't that fun, that feel shoehorned in, and endless phone conversations that make me want to rip my hair out. Purely based on average score, this one should have placed way, way lower on the list, but I, in the goodness of my heart, have boosted it higher because it's actually probably my favorite game to watch other people play. Because again, the characters and the story are so compelling. I just would rather not play this game myself. Number 14, The Legend of the Crystal Skull. The atmosphere in this game is immaculate. It's dark, it's creepy, it's intense. The characters are also pretty solid. I even have a soft spot for Lamont, even though he's kind of unremarkable as a character. There are a couple of puzzles and minigames in here that I really dislike, but on the whole, they're pretty solid. There are 2 puzzles in here that I wish had just been slightly better executed, which would have boosted this game even higher on the list because they're 2 of the staple landmark puzzles of the game. Also, the end game of this one is really great. It's so intense and very suspenseful. Number 13, Alibi in Ashes. The story and gameplay mechanics in this one are really unique, with Nancy trapped in jail and her friends having to collect evidence for her. We're also using police techniques to solve the crime, which is another thing unique to this game and a fresh take on the series. I also think the characters are really solid, with both Alexi and Deirdre as clear standouts. Obviously, one of the major downsides of this is that switching characters is pretty clunky, but I think that's the only real negative to this game. Alibi in Ashes isn't a personal favorite for me, but I think it's really solid and well-rounded, especially for how late it is in the series. Number 12, Message in a Haunted Mansion, falling just outside of my top 11. This and another game that we'll talk about later on the list are 2 of the most nostalgic games in the series for me. For being only the 3rd game in the series, Her Interactive really nailed so many things in this game. The spook factor is on point, the soundtrack is fantastic, secret passageways, a seance, and a really solid in-game puzzle with the Chinese characters. Message in a Haunted Mansion is small but mighty, and the characters only kinda look like robots from my nightmares. Alright, we're now moving into my top 11 games, the definitive cream of the crop, that in my opinion stand head and shoulders above all the other games in the series. I have divided these up into 2 different tiers, and now we're moving into the lower of those 2 tiers, which is called Don't Leave Me, I Love You! I can't quite nail Lulu's intonation. Number 11, The Ghost of Thornton Hall. This is one of those games that doesn't really have a weak link. The story is strong, the characters are strong, the puzzles are strong, and the spooky vibe is very strong. This one really only falls to 11 because it's not quite as much of a personal fave as the ones higher. I love the scare factor, but there is a scary game I prefer to this one. I love the story, but I think a similar story was executed marginally better by another game later on this list. This game is incredibly well-rounded. It just doesn't have an X factor that would bump it slightly higher. Number 10, Secret of Shadow Ranch. Much like Thornton Hall, this is an incredibly well-done, well-rounded game that's just slightly less of a personal fave than those above it. I think this is probably objectively one of the 5 best games in the series, and it's also certainly one of the top 2 fan favorites from what I've seen. It nails the atmosphere and the characters, and the story is one of the best in the series. I, like most people, don't love the chores, and personally the ranch vibe is not one I love, but some of the puzzles in this game are absolute all-time faves in the entire series. Number 9, Sea of Darkness. An incredibly well-crafted, well-rounded game that I just don't have quite as much personal bias toward as the ones higher on the list. This is the only one in the top 11 that I have yet to replay, so it doesn't quite have the nostalgia factor that the rest of the 11 do. It does have a very strong cast and story, and I had a really, really fun time with the puzzles in this one. It's an excellent level of difficulty. I think I could see this one moving higher after a replay, but I do just really, really love the ones that I've placed higher than this one. Number 8. The Haunting of Castle Malloy. I really just can't in good conscience put this one higher because I'm fully aware of its flaws. The characters are not strong, nor is the story, but I do enjoy that relationship drama, and I absolutely love some unhinged goofiness in my Nancy Drew games, and this one really delivers on that. But most of all, the puzzles and minigames in this one are fantastic. I have so much fun playing this one, and I even love some puzzles in here that are notoriously very hated. I'll gladly fly around on a jetpack, give sheep mohawks, match otters to their butts, and sort chemicals any day. Number 7, Warnings at Waverly Academy. On a purely technical level, I would argue that this is one of the top 5 best games in the series. The characters are fantastic. All of them are really interesting and relevant despite having a larger cast than the average in a game. And also, Mel is our queen. We love Mel here. The story's fun. Who doesn't love sabotage at a school? The dark academia vibes are immaculate. But my personal gripes with the chores and the puzzles keep it from getting any higher on the list. Of the games in my top 11, this is my least favorite puzzle game by a long shot, and the chores aren't difficult, but they are ever present. That said, everything else about this game is firing on all cylinders at all times. And also, I do think it's a really great game for new players because the intuitiveness is 10 out of 10. Number 6, Shadow at the Water's Edge. This one actually just got demoted from my top 5 last week. Shadow at the Water's Edge shines most in its story and atmosphere. The story of the broken Shimizu family is my favorite story in the entire series, exploring grief in a deeper and darker way than any of the other games have. In my opinion, the characters individually are not all spectacular, but their interconnectedness is integral to the story. This is also my favorite scary game. The vibes and music are both beautiful and terrifying in an excellent way. Like Waverly Academy, the puzzles are probably my least favorite part of this one, but I do really enjoy a lot of them. Even big Sudoku and pachinko. I play so much pachinko in this game. Also, when I replayed it last week, I finally solved the big nonogram without spoilers for the first time, and if that's not a big ego boost, I don't know what is. Number 5, The Curse of Blackmore Manor. Infamously difficult and creepy, this is both a nostalgic fave and a recent fave after replaying it. The detail they put into crafting the Penvillain family line is really impressive, and the game offers an impressive number of creepy cutscenes and moments. The atmosphere is beautiful, with tons of secret passages to discover, and possibly my favorite music in the entire series. I think the characters are the clear weak point, but even then, There's Ethel making everything just a smidge creepier just by existing and popping up at random. Also, you can get eaten by a giant carnivorous plant and murder an annoying parrot. What's not to love? Alright, we're here at the tippy top of the list, my top 4 favorite Nancy Drew games in the very, very top tier, which I have named Cheeseburger. If you've been keeping track, 2 of the remaining 4 games are absolute fan favorites, really cold take to have them at the top of my list, and the other 2 are a smidge controversial, but all 4 of these are near and dear to my heart. Let's start with number 4, in my opinion, the most criminally underrated game in the series. It's The Captive Curse. These top 4 were so hard to parse out, and I kind of hate that this one landed at 4, but here we are. I think Captive Curse has the best cast of characters in the entire series. I would protect Lucas with my life. Carl's so much fun. Renata is really compelling, and Anya is fun to gossip with. Raid and Monster are also 2 of my favorite minigames across the entirety of the series. The puzzles in this one are all a really solid difficulty level as well. None of them are really difficult or really annoying. And it's also got great atmosphere and spook factor. All around, it's an excellent game, it's really well-rounded, and I think it deserves so much more love. There are also extra deeper layers to the story that not everyone discovers, but when you do, it makes it even more compelling than it already was. Number 3, The Silent Spy. Listen, I get it. I know a lot of people have a lot of complaints about this game. I know the storytelling's a bit wonky. I know the villain motive is weak. I know certain aspects of the game make it difficult to suspend your disbelief. I know a lot of people don't like how Kate's story was dealt with, but I love this game, so it gets 3rd place. This is one of the ones I played for the first time in 2020 during lockdown, and it was one of the first times when playing one of these games that I found myself really loving specific individual characters in the series. Both Zoe and Alec embody an excellent level of shiftiness and snark that I will always really, really love. And I also really like Moira as this window into Kate's life before Nancy. And I honestly even enjoy Bridget. She's fun. I also really love all the puzzles in this game as well, and I love all the goofy, unhinged spy elements like ziplining across a courtyard full of people in broad daylight. That's so silly. Also, the phone conversations with Ned and Carson are one of the rare moments that I actually find myself enjoying phone conversations in this series. Overall, I get it. It has its flaws. I understand why some people don't like it, but I love it. It's so unhinged and silly and fun. Also, I'm a product of the Spy Kids generation. What do you expect from me? Number 2, the nostalgia bomb of the entire series for me. It's Treasure in the Royal Tower. Before I got back into the series during lockdown, the Nancy Drew memory that was permanently seared into my brain was the entire sequence of going through the elevator shaft to get into the library. That is just such a core childhood memory for me. And in my humble opinion, this game absolutely holds up to the nostalgia. Professor Hotchkiss and Dexter are absolute icons, 2 of the best characters in the entire series, and the environmental exploration here is top-notch. This isn't a difficult game by any means, but I always forget how solid the sleuthing in this game actually is. For me, this is just the ultimate nostalgic and cozy game. And here we are at number 1, a lot of people's favorite game in the series, an incredibly cold take as the best game in the series, but I love it. I named this tier after it. It's Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon. With all my other favorite games in this series, I'm fully willing to accept that they're flawed, but with this one, not only is it my favorite game in the series, I also think it's the best crafted game in the entire series on an objective level. This game just fires on all cylinders at all times. It's so good. The intro is so compelling. It grabs you immediately, really sucks you into this story. Real big Agatha Christie Murder on the Orient Express vibes, and I will never complain about that. The cast is incredibly compelling both in personality and in relation to each other. We get fights, we get drama, we get framings for crimes, and of course we get to work alongside the Hardy Boys, which is always a fun time. But personally, more than any of those, this is an excellent puzzle game. The entire train is one big puzzle and it's done so well. As I've mentioned before, intuitiveness in these games is very important to me, and for me, this is the most intuitive game in the entire series. The game flows so well, and the story and environment evolve alongside the train itself. It's just so well done. So there we are. That is my ranking of all 34 Nancy Drew games. That bottom middle section from like Ransom to Ghost Dogs was so difficult. I kept moving them around everywhere, but I think I'm finally content with where everything has landed. And if you don't like where I've ranked things, that's cool. Let me know your favorite and least favorite Nancy Drew games down in the comments. So as far as upcoming podcast stuff, I think I'm going to keep up the Nancy Drew content for a little bit longer, but I will probably start sprinkling in some content about one of my favorite TV shows, The Mole. As I'm recording this, the first chunk of episodes of season 2 of the Netflix reboot of the show are going to drop in a few days. So what better time to discuss one of my favorite TV shows than now? Also, I've been obsessively rewatching the old seasons and they're so good, and that has me very hyped. So my mole obsession is incoming and overtaking the Nancy Drew obsession at the moment. Also, I have created an Instagram for the podcast, which will be linked in the description and show notes. I think that for now, this will be my primary platform for most communication and updates, simply because it's my favorite platform. And Instagram stories are my favorite place to post about niche interests. So give it a little follow and you'll be kept up to date on when podcast episodes drop and any random Instagram stories I happen to drop over there. And if you enjoyed this episode and want to hear me talk about my other niche interests, like the mole, please hit follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on and come along with me as I make some niche references.